Have you ever built something so carefully, so precisely tuned to its environment, that it felt less like software and more like a living system, and then watched silently as someone tore it down with a single sentence? My name is Daniel Reyes. 7 years ago, I designed and built a legal compliance system from the ground up. It didn't make headlines, it didn't win awards, but it worked. Reliably, invisibly, every single day. The day Carter Langston, our new CTO, stood in my office doorway, I knew what was coming before he spoke. He didn't sit, just held his iPad like a verdict. Daniel, your system has served its purpose, but it's time we moved forward. We're standardizing with LexaCloud 1. Full cloud, scalable, integrated. I didn't argue. People like Carter don't come for debate. They come to execute change. Impressive background, bulletproof confidence, and a PowerPoint full of promises. What he didn't realize was that I had already seen this story play out, more than once. And when it fails, it doesn't fail quietly. It collapses in courtrooms, audit rooms, and regulatory hearings, where downtime isn't just inconvenient, it's catastrophic. So I nodded, smiled, and quietly prepared for the moment they would need me again. Because they would. I didn't start in law. In fact, I spent most of my early career working with NGOs and nonprofits, building field data systems for crisis zones, places where internet was unstable, and downtime could mean lives lost. I learned quickly that the best software wasn't the one with the cleanest interface or the fanciest pitch deck. It was the one that worked under pressure with no second chances. After a failed attempt to turn one of those systems into a funded startup, too niche for VCs, too real for hype, I found myself looking for something stable. A recruiter connected me to Evermark Hollis LLP, a mid-sized law firm handling everything, from corporate litigation to white-collar defense. What struck me from day one was how fragile their internal systems were. Important case files passed around in email chains, billing data living in spreadsheets. 1 week in, a data glitch delayed, a court filing. The partners weren't just angry, they were exposed. That same night, I built a prototype, a streamlined compliance engine with time tracking, document logging, real-time backup, and encrypted audit trails. By the end of the month, we'd run our first real case through it. It worked. I wasn't brought in as a CTO or head of product. I didn't need a title. What I had was quiet authority. I listened. I spent long hours with paralegals, sitting beside them, watching how they worked, how they made decisions under pressure. Most engineers build systems based on documentation. I built mine based on human behavior, on the chaos of late night filings, last-minute trial prep, and cross-border legal rules. I designed redundancy into every step. If the cloud went down, the system ran locally. If the local server failed, encrypted flash backups kicked in. Attorneys didn't have to think about it. That was the point. A system that worked because it disappeared when you needed to focus. I didn't speak much at partner meetings, but my report spoke for me. The software reduced billing errors by 78%, saved over 3.2 million in unbilled hours in just the first 2 years. In 2020, during the firm-wide energy consolidation case, the system processed 17 terabytes of discovery materials, tracked over 200,000 billable hours across 3 cities, and generated SEC-compliant audit reports in under 15 minutes. No downtime, no crisis, just quiet precision. People started noticing. Other firms asked if we licensed the platform. A few tried to lure me away. Even software vendors reached out to discuss strategic partnerships. I said no to all of them. This wasn't about scale or venture capital. It was about building something that mattered and watching it work, silently when the stakes were highest. The only person who ever truly understood what I was doing was Helen Worthing, the firm's managing partner at the time. She wasn't tech-savvy, but she had intuition. She once told me, "Daniel, your software does for our firm what a good attorney does for a client. It protects us, especially when we don't even know we're in danger." When the numbers came in, the clean audits, the profitable quarters, she gave me equity in the firm. "You're not just IT," she said, "you're infrastructure." But then Helen retired. A new generation stepped in, eager to modernize, streamline, centralize. That's when Carter Langston arrived, polished, confident, straight out of Deloitte's digital transformation division. He came with charts, white papers, and a solution that would, in his words, unify our operational backbone. I remember shaking his hand the first day. His grip was firm, his smile rehearsed. He told me he admired what I'd built. Then, 2 weeks later, he blocked my access to the development server. I wasn't surprised. Legacy systems, no matter how effective, don't look good on slide decks. Carter didn't see quiet stability as a strength. He saw it as a liability, because it couldn't be branded, sold, or scaled. But I knew something he didn't. I knew this firm didn't run on dashboards. It ran on trust, precision, and timing. And my system, though invisible, had become the nervous system of that trust. He was about to learn what happens when you sever a nerve. It started, as these things often do, with a strategic alignment review. Carter had been with the firm barely 6 weeks when he scheduled a mandatory system audit. He brought in a consulting team from his previous employer, 2 men in suits and 1 woman with a clipboard who never made eye contact. They didn't ask how things worked. They asked what software we used, how long we'd had it, whether it was vendor-backed, and whether it supported open standards for cross-platform scaling. I answered politely. They took notes without context. What none of them asked was how often the system failed. If they had, the answer would have been never. 2 weeks later, Carter held a presentation for the executive committee. I wasn't invited, but word traveled fast. Glossy slides, impressive graphs, sweeping promises. The phrase that got repeated across the firm like a mantra: LexaCloud One is the future, secure, scalable, AI-ready, backed by a nationally recognized vendor, and, crucially, fully compliant with the firm's upcoming digital modernization goals, whatever that meant. I was called into Carter's office that Friday. His assistant didn't look me in the eye when she ushered me in. Carter sat behind his desk, hands folded. There was a legal pad in front of him with bullet points already written. "We've decided to sunset your platform by the end of the quarter," he said. "It's been a great internal tool, but we need to future-proof our operations. LexaCloud will take over client billing, document management, and compliance tracking. They'll handle the migration. No transition needed." I looked at him. "What's the plan for legacy data?" "We're migrating what's critical. Everything else will be archived." "And who defines what's critical?" Carter smiled faintly. "The vendor has a framework." He kept using that word, vendor, as if outsourcing judgment was a form of progress. He didn't ask me what the system did beneath the surface, how it tied together unstructured client notes, billing anomalies, and time-stamped court filing confirmations into a single coherent audit trail. He had no idea that some of the firm's most sensitive matters, sealed investigations, confidential settlements, relied on encryption keys I personally rotated every month. To him, it was a black box. And black boxes are easy to discard when you're holding a flashlight. He ended the meeting with practiced courtesy. "We appreciate your contributions, Daniel, truly. But we're moving in a different direction. You'll receive a severance package and HR will walk you through your offboarding schedule. You'll have until the end of next week to collect your materials." I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. This decision had already been approved, budgeted, and spun into a press release Carter had likely drafted before this conversation. The following Monday, internal memos went out firm-wide. Evermark and Hollis transitions to LexaCloud One as part of its modernization initiative. The message was carefully worded, praising innovation, emphasizing alignment, promising zero disruptions. My name wasn't mentioned. What stung more than the decision itself was the silence that followed. A few people from finance sent private notes. "I can't believe they're doing this. Your system never let us down." But mostly people stayed quiet. That's the thing about institutional betrayal. It's not always personal. Sometimes it's just protocol, polished, documented, non-confrontational, like a system update that erases a decade's work with a single click. I backed up everything, left behind clean documentation, made sure no one could say I was difficult or emotional. Then I printed the business cards I had designed but never ordered. Daniel Reyes, independent systems consultant. Quiet competence in 12-point serif. As I walked out on my final day, Carter passed me in the hallway and said, "No hard feelings, right?" I nodded. None at all. But deep down, I knew something he didn't. LexaCloud would stumble, not because it was bad software, but because it wasn't built for how this firm actually worked. And when it did, they'd come calling. I didn't leave in protest. There was no dramatic exit, no raised voices or slammed doors. Just quiet steps, a boxed-up monitor, and a systems folder archived one last time. I even left them a checklist, simple, readable, color-coded, so the junior IT team wouldn't be caught off guard. I knew they wouldn't follow it. But I wrote it anyway. Not for them. For me. A final act of professionalism, like setting the table before leaving a house you've sold. On the elevator ride down, I stared at the floor numbers blinking past. I wasn't angry exactly. I was alert. You develop a kind of radar working in systems long enough. You notice patterns before others do. I had seen this before. A firm falling in love with presentation over functionality. Leadership dazzled by cloud-native interfaces and cost projections printed in glossy brochures. But it's not the features that fail. It's the assumptions. And LexaCloud's assumptions were dangerously wrong. Their system required constant cloud connectivity for even the most basic tasks. The document viewer didn't support offline caching for encrypted case files. Timestamp verification relied on third-party time servers with no redundancy. And their billing logic couldn't handle split jurisdiction matters, the kind we handled every single day. These weren't theoretical flaws, they were structural, baked in. And no one at the top had asked the questions that would have uncovered them. I didn't warn anyone. Not explicitly. That would have sounded like bitterness. And I don't traffic in that. But as I shook hands with Claire, our senior associate, I said, "If LexaCloud ever locks up around 4:59 p.m. on a filing deadline, you might want to check the sync buffer logs." She blinked, half smiled. "Always 2 steps ahead, huh?" I shrugged. Old habit. That weekend, I reinstalled the development environment on my personal machine. Not to work on it, just to have it. I backed up the old architecture maps, the anomaly logs, the billing audit trails. I poured a cup of coffee and finally took out the cards. Daniel Reyes, independent systems consultant. Clean white, matte finish, unbranded. Just a name, a phone number, and a quiet suggestion of competence. I didn't know when the call would come, only that it would. Because no matter how clean the press release, no matter how big the rollout budget, reality always arrives. And when it does, it doesn't knock. It crashes through the front door. It was exactly 34 days later. I remember because it was a Thursday, mid-morning, and I had just returned from a walk when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Denver area code. I almost let it ring out, but something told me to pick up. "Daniel, this is Claire Hargrove from Evermark. I hope this isn't a bad time." There was panic under her voice, polite, measured, but real. "Not at all," I said, already walking toward my desk. "What's going on?" "It's the regulatory audit, the Colorado Securities Board. They've requested billing verification for the Hansen arbitration case. They need time-stamped logs for all filings, billing statements, and internal communication. Trails going back 18 months. I knew the case, high-profile, messy, sensitive. I also knew what was coming." "And?" I asked. "They're gone." She exhaled, shaky. "Not the case files. Those are in the document portal. But the billing data, the time logs. LexaCloud says it's a temporary synchronization issue with the compliance layer. But it's been 7 hours, Daniel, 7. They escalated to Tier 2 support 2 hours ago. Tier 3 is out of Singapore, and the audit deadline is tomorrow." I sat down, opened my laptop. "Where's Carter?" "No one's seen him since this morning. He canceled his afternoon meetings. People are nervous." I didn't gloat. This wasn't the time. Claire didn't need a lecture. She needed a solution. I can recover the Hansen billing trail, I said quietly. But I'll need direct access to the local server backups. You think they're still intact? They should be. If no one's overwritten the base layer, and if the migration team didn't gut the access logs. Silence, then. I'll call you back in 5. She called back in 4. We found a shadow environment. Your dev instance. It was archived but not scrubbed. I've got someone restoring it to a separate box now. Good, I said. Tell them not to touch anything else. I'll be there in 20. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my consultant bag, half laptop, half lifeline, and drove downtown. The sky over Denver had that strange, high-altitude glow. Clear, sharp, like everything could break at any moment. When I walked into the firm's lobby, the energy was different. Quieter, phones ringing, but no chatter. People moving quickly but avoiding eye contact. I knew the signs. It wasn't just technical failure. It was crisis management mode. Claire met me at reception. She looked relieved, but also older, like she'd aged 10 years in the last 10 days. 3rd floor, conference room B. We've set you up with your old credentials. The door opened, and there it was. My system, my interface, my code base, running exactly as I'd left it. Someone had had the foresight to mirror the entire development environment before the migration. Redundant, intact, perfect. I logged in. Everything was there. Line item billing entries, time-stamped filing verifications, encrypted correspondence logs, all neatly indexed and ready for extraction. How long will it take? Claire asked. I looked up. 10 minutes. Maybe 12. The relief in her expression was indescribable. She didn't hug me, but I saw it in her eyes. Gratitude wrapped in disbelief. While the system compiled the report, I heard raised voices. From the hall, Carter pacing on the phone, gesturing hard. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd written them myself in other lives. This is a vendor-side issue. No, we're escalating. Yes, we're still compliant. Technically, the report finished rendering. 18 months of records perfectly formatted for audit submission. I printed 2 hard copies and handed them to Claire. This will satisfy the regulators, I said. She flipped through them. LexiCloud told us their compliance tools weren't compatible with our legacy formatting, said we needed a manual recompile. I smiled. That's because they don't know what your legacy was. That day, they didn't just recover billing data. They remembered what reliability looked like. Claire didn't need to say it out loud, but I saw it on her face. The shift. One moment I was a relic of a previous system. The next I was the only person standing between the firm and regulatory sanctions. Within an hour, I had a temporary contract in my inbox. Business continuity consultant. Hourly rate $400. It was signed before Carter even finished his damage control call. The conference room became my temporary command center. A junior associate rolled in a spare monitor. Someone else brought me coffee. And Claire assigned a paralegal to assist with any requests. I could feel the quiet deference around me. Not worship, just recognition. In a place built on certainty, I was the first person all week who delivered it. By the end of the day, I had recovered full billing logs for the Hansen arbitration, generated 3 compliance reports, and rebuilt a document correlation tree that LexiCloud had misclassified as non-critical metadata. Their system didn't know what to do with interconnected references between pretrial filings and witness summaries. Mine did. Always had. When I stepped into the break room around 6 p.m., a junior partner approached me. We didn't realize, Carter said your system was... He trailed off, searching for a non-insulting way to say, obsolete. It's okay, I said. Obsolete just means someone didn't bother to ask what it really does. Returned to my station just in time to see Carter walk past the glass wall of the conference room. He didn't look inside, but I saw the glance. Brief, tight-lipped, almost calculating. I wondered if he realized how close he'd come to disaster, or if he still believed this was all temporary turbulence, growing pains, implementation friction. It wasn't. It was systemic. Later that evening, I requested access to the audit logs from the LexiCloud transition. Not to interfere, just to understand. Within 10 minutes, I found two things that alarmed me. First, the data migration had skipped entire record types marked as non-standard. Second, and more troubling, LexiCloud's team had restructured certain billing fields to conform with their own schema, eliminating case-specific logic that our firm had depended on for years. That night, Claire called me from her car. "Daniel, the managing partners want to know if you can stay on, at least through quarter end. There's a growing list of issues, and frankly, LexiCloud isn't answering half our support tickets." I looked around the conference room, the monitor, the reports, the reawakened system quietly humming, doing exactly what it was built to do. "I'll stay," I said. "But from this point on, I want full autonomy over data restoration and internal documentation. You'll have it." As I ended the call, I thought about the first time I walked into this firm. I was just a contractor with a vision and a quiet pitch. Now they were asking me to hold the line, again. Only this time they knew exactly what that was worth, and I wasn't going to let them forget. The more I dug, the more it became clear this wasn't just a bad software implementation. It was a full-scale failure of judgment, one built on shortcuts, assumptions, and I suspected something far less innocent. Late that Friday night, I sat alone in conference room B with 3 browser tabs open. One for the LexiCloud implementation contract, one for the vendor's support documentation, and one for the metadata logs I'd pulled from the restored system. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for patterns, and what I found wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate omission. LexiCloud had completely ignored several of our custom data fields during migration. Not because they were unnecessary, but because they didn't fit the vendor's default schema. These fields weren't cosmetic. They were used to calculate case complexity ratings, which in turn fed into billing adjustments and resource allocations. Without them, everything from client invoicing to internal profitability reports would be skewed. Worse, the metadata was deleted. Not archived, not flagged, just dropped. Still, that alone didn't explain the speed of the decision or the certainty with which Carter had backed LexiCloud. So I looked closer at the contract, buried on page 14 was a clause about expedited vendor approval, signed by Carter 3 days before the system audit had even begun. I followed that trail further, checked corporate filings, vendor ownership records, even old press releases. That's when I found it. LexiCloud's parent company, Embernet Technologies, had a silent equity partner. A boutique advisory firm called Halberd Strategic. Carter Langston's LinkedIn profile, tucked way down in the endorsement section, still listed him as former partner, technology vertical, Halberd Strategic. So that was it. LexiCloud wasn't just a vendor, it was an inside job. Carter had used his position to push through a product sold by a firm he used to be part of, and from the looks of it, likely still had financial ties to. I sat back, staring at the screen. It made sense now. The push for urgency, the dismissal of due diligence, the way he'd controlled access to performance reviews. This wasn't about innovation. It was about Carter building a success story he could take credit for, maybe even take equity from. I documented everything. Not in an email, not in a Slack message. I wrote a clean, quiet report, 10 pages, bullet-pointed, sourced, and time-stamped. Then I printed 3 hard copies and locked them in my briefcase. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing for accountability. That weekend, I met Claire for coffee. I handed her the report without a word. She flipped through the pages, eyes narrowing. "You're saying he had a financial interest in the vendor?" "I'm saying the pieces fit. And if they don't, someone should ask why they were arranged this way." She nodded slowly. "The partners need to see this." I didn't argue. I just watched the way she held the report, like it was heavier than it looked. What began as a failed system rollout had just become something far bigger. And someone at the top was going to have to answer for it. The following Monday, the managing partners called an emergency meeting. No agenda, no minutes. Just 8 people in a room, each holding a copy of my report. I wasn't invited at first. But 10 minutes in, Claire texted me, "They want you here. Now." I walked into the boardroom with my laptop under one arm and a calm I didn't entirely feel. Carter was already seated, crisp suit, flawless posture, doing his best impression of unshakable confidence. But I could see the strain around his eyes, the kind that comes from realizing the ground beneath you is no longer solid. David Hollis, senior partner, gestured toward the seat beside him. "Daniel, thank you for coming. We understand you've been helping us manage the transition, and that you've discovered some complications." I nodded. "You could say that." Carter jumped in, his tone overly smooth. "Daniel has been a valuable support during our migration. We're still encountering standard growing pains, but LexaCloud remains confident in full system restoration within the week." I opened my laptop, connected to the screen, and loaded a slide. It wasn't flashy, just a clean table, data fields, system logs, deleted entries. Here are the billing fields that were dropped during migration. These aren't optional. They tie directly into compliance reporting, case-level profit analysis, and performance metrics tied to partner compensation. I clicked again. Here's the metadata trail showing when and how the deletion occurred. Automated, yes, but predictable. LexaCloud's schema doesn't support nested financial logic. It overwrites anything it doesn't recognize. I paused, then brought up the contract timeline. And here's the approval sequence. The vendor selection was formalized 3 days before the system audit began. The evaluation was just a formality. The partners said nothing, but I saw the moment they understood. Claire slid my report across the table to David Hollis. Daniel also traced LexaCloud's ownership structure. Their parent company is Embernet. One of Embernet's equity partners is Halberd Strategic. David raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that where you worked before us, Carter?" Carter straightened. "Yes, I consulted there for a few years, but I had no direct involvement with this deal." "Yet your signature approved the vendor before the audit was complete," another partner said. "And the migration removed key financial fields," added Patricia Sloan, head of compliance. "Which explains why we couldn't run the quarterly profit distributions, which frankly we still don't have." I raised my hand slightly. "Actually, you do." I opened a file and passed out printed copies. I restored the reports using archived logic from the original system. Same formulas, same data sets, same audit trails. Everything's reconciled to the last dollar. The room was silent as the partners reviewed the documents. Then David Hollis closed his folder. "I'd like to propose the following. We terminate the LexaCloud contract effective immediately, re-establish our in-house system under Daniel's management, and authorize a full forensic audit of the vendor selection process. All in favor?" 8 hands went up. Carter didn't even try to stop it. The vote was unanimous. He sat frozen as the decision washed over the room. Then David added, "Carter, please prepare your transition documentation. You'll be stepping down effective today. Legal will coordinate the separation." Carter opened his mouth to object, then closed it again. He knew. Claire looked at me. "Can we restore the full system?" "It'll take about 48 hours. Another 12 for testing. And then you'll be back to full functionality. Better than before." She smiled, not just with relief, but with respect. This time, no one was pretending I didn't belong in the room. Justice hadn't come loudly, but it had arrived, quiet, professional, undeniable. And for the first time in weeks, the firm finally felt like it had found its footing again. Restoring the system took less than 2 days. Testing and validation, another 12 hours. And just like that, Evermark and Hollis was fully operational. Again, this time with cleaner logic paths, improved resilience, and a reporting layer I'd quietly refined during the weeks I was gone. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew. The thing they had tried to replace turned out to be the one thing holding the place together. Within a month, we had transitioned all active cases back onto the internal platform. The chaos of LexaCloud's brief reign faded, but its impact remained etched in policy. The firm implemented a new procurement protocol requiring all third-party systems to undergo independent evaluation before adoption. Vendor transparency, conflict of interest disclosures, and contingency protocols became non-negotiable. I wasn't just rebuilding a system, I was helping reshape the way they made decisions. Claire was promoted to CIO, reporting directly to the managing partners. Her first order of business, offering me a full-time CTO role. I turned it down, not out of resentment, but because I finally understood the value of working for something, not inside it. I proposed a long-term consultancy instead, retained advisor with quarterly reviews and operational freedom. They agreed. No hesitation. Word spread quickly. Within 3 months, I had picked up 4 more clients, firms who'd either survived their own Lexicloud-like disaster, or were smart enough to want to avoid one. I hired 2 developers, both of whom had been laid off by larger platforms when their departments were consolidated. One had spent 5 years building accessibility, tools that were quietly deprecated for user simplicity. The other had engineered compliance audits for a medical data firm before their budget was cut. I didn't need stars. I needed people who understood reliability. What surprised me most wasn't the demand. It was the relief in people's voices when I explained what I built. Not some flashy SaaS product, not a subscription with roadmap promises, just custom systems that did exactly what they were supposed to, quietly, predictably, under pressure. The transformation wasn't just technical, it was cultural. Firms that had once chased shiny solutions began asking better questions. What happens if this fails? Who's accountable? How fast can we recover? And do we actually understand what we're building our business on? Back at Evermark, quarterly profit distributions resumed without delay. No missing data, no reprocessing, just clean reports delivered on time. The partners never again referred to my system as legacy. They called it by name. One afternoon, David Hollis stopped me in the hallway. "Daniel, do you know what you really gave us?" "Working software," I said with a smile. He shook his head. "Confidence, the kind we used to take for granted." And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about restoring a system. It was about restoring trust. In the data, in the process, in the quiet professionals who make things work when it matters most. The truth is, modern failure rarely looks like fire and smoke, it looks like silence. A missing number on a spreadsheet. A sync that never completed. A courtroom with no evidence file. We don't lose control all at once. We lose it in increments, by trading understanding for convenience, depth for dashboards, and people for platforms. Lexicloud wasn't the problem. Neither was Carter, not entirely. The real failure was in the assumption that systems can be replaced without understanding why they worked in the first place. Good technology isn't about trends, it's about trust. Built slowly, maintained carefully, and stress-tested in the real world. There's a quiet kind of justice in seeing a simple, resilient system outlast something 10 times more expensive. But justice is just the beginning. What matters is what you learn and what you never forget. Now I'm curious, have you ever seen a system that looked impressive from the outside but completely failed under pressure? Or maybe you've been the one quietly holding things together while someone else got the credit? Let me know below. I read every story, and if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, stick around. There's more coming. Real people, real systems, and what happens when both are underestimated.